Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. And if you want more Sandman, I have extra stories that are too spicy for my main feed available on my Patreon. You can even join at the free tier and get everything. Today we are back in the book of Bengal folklore written down by Behari. In this story, a son licks something off his stepmom, but I assure you that it isn't Sandman After Dark. Okay, let's begin. Strike, but hear. Once upon a time, there reigned a king who had 3 sons. One day his subjects came to him and said, "O incarnation of justice, the kingdom is infested with thieves and robbers. Our property is not safe. We pray your majesty to catch hold of these thieves and punish them." The king said to his sons, "O my sons, I am old, but you are all in the prime of manhood. How is it that my kingdom is full of thieves? I look to you to catch hold of these thieves." The 3 princes made up their mind to patrol the city every night. With this view, they set up a station in the outskirts of the city, where they kept their horses. In an early part of the night, the oldest prince rode upon his horse and went through the whole city, but he did not see a single thief. He came back to the station. About midnight, the second prince got upon his horse and rode through every part of the city, but he did not see nor hear of a single thief. He also came back to the station. Some hours after midnight, the youngest prince went on the rounds, and when he came near the gate of the palace where his father lived, he saw a beautiful woman coming out of the palace. The prince accosted the woman and asked who she was and where she was going at that hour of the night. The woman answered, "I am Rajlakshmi, the guardian deity of this palace. The king will be killed tonight. I am therefore not needed here. I am going away." The prince did not know what to make of this message. After a moment's reflection, he said to the goddess, "But suppose the king is not killed tonight. Then do you have any objection to coming back to the palace and staying there?" "I have no objection," replied the goddess. The prince begged the goddess to go in, promising to do his best to prevent the king from being killed. Then the goddess entered the palace again, and in a moment disappeared from the prince's sight. The prince went straight into the bedroom of his royal father. There he lay, immersed in deep sleep. His second and youngest wife, the stepmother of our prince, was sleeping in another bed in the room. A light was burning dimly. What was his surprise when the prince saw a huge cobra going round and round the golden bedstead on which his father was sleeping. The prince took his sword and cut the serpent in 2. Not satisfied with killing the cobra, he cut it up into 100 pieces and put them inside the pan dish which was inside the room. While the prince was cutting up the serpent, a drop of blood fell on the breast of his stepmother, who was sleeping hard by. The prince was in great distress. He said to himself, "I have saved my father but killed my mother." How was the drop of blood to be taken out of his mother's breast? He wrapped a piece of cloth around his tongue 7 times, and with it licked up the drop of blood. But while he was in the act of doing this, his stepmother woke up, and opening her eyes saw that it was her stepson, the youngest prince. The young prince rushed out of the room. The queen, intending to ruin the youngest prince, who she hated, called out to her husband, my lord, are you awake? Are you awake? Wake yourself up. Here is a nice piece of business." The king, on waking, inquired what the matter was. "The matter, my lord? Your worthy son, the youngest prince, of whom you speak so highly, was just here. I caught him in the act of touching my breast. Doubtless he came here with wicked intent. And this is your worthy son?" The king was horror-struck. The prince went to the station with his brothers, but told them nothing. Early in the morning, the king called his eldest son to him and said, "If a man to whom I am entrusted my honor and my life proves faithless, how should he be punished?" The eldest prince replied, "Doubtless such a man's head should be cut off. But before you kill, you should see whether the man is really faithless." "What do you mean?" inquired the king. "Let your majesty be pleased to listen," answered the prince. and the eldest prince began to tell a story. Once upon a time there lived a goldsmith who had a grown-up son. And this son had a wife who had the rare faculty of understanding the language of beasts. But neither her husband nor anyone else knew that she had this uncommon gift. One night she was laying in bed beside her husband in his house, which was close to a river, when she heard a jackal howl out, "There goes a carcass floating on the river. Is there anyone who will take off the diamond ring of the finger of the dead man and give me the corpse to eat?" The woman understood the jackal's language, got up from the bed, and went to the riverside. The husband, who was not asleep, followed his wife at some distance, so as not to be observed by her. The woman went into the water, tugged the floating corpse towards the shore, and saw the diamond ring on the finger. Unable to loosen it with her hand, as the fingers of the dead body had swelled, she bit it off with her teeth, and put the dead body upon the land. She then went to her bed, where she had been preceded by her husband. The young goldsmith lay beside his wife almost petrified with fear, for he concluded, after what he had saw, that his wife was not human, but a Rakshasi. He spent the rest of the night tossing in his bed, and in the early morning he spoke to his father in the following manner. "Father, the woman who you have given to marry is not a real woman, but a Rakshasi. Last night, as I was laying in bed with her, I heard outside the house, towards the riverside, a jackal set up with a fearful howl. On hearing this, thinking that I was asleep, she got up from the bed, opened the door, and went out to the riverside. I was surprised to see her go out alone at the dead of night. I suspected evil and followed her, but so that she could not see me. What do you think she did? Oh, horror of horrors! She went into the stream, dragged towards the shore the dead body of a man which was floating by, and began to eat it. I saw this with my own eyes. I then returned home while she was feasting upon the carcass and jumped into bed. In a few minutes, she also returned, bolted the door, and lay beside me. Oh, father, how can I live with a Rakshasi? She will certainly kill me and eat me up one night." The old goldsmith was not a little shocked to hear this account. Both father and son agreed that the woman should be taken to the forest and left there to be devoured by wild beasts. Accordingly, the young goldsmith spoke to his wife thus: "My dear love, you had better not cook much this morning. Only boil rice and burn a brinjal, for I must take you today to see your father and mother, who are dying to see you." At the mention of her father's house, she became full of joy, and finished the cooking in no time. The husband and wife snatched a hasty breakfast and started on their journey. The way lay through a dense jungle, in which the goldsmith thought to himself of leaving his wife alone, to be eaten up by the wild beasts. But while they were passing through the jungle, the woman heard a serpent hiss, the meaning of which was understood by her, was as follows: "O passer-by, how thankful I should be to you, if you catch hold of that croaking frog in yonder hole, which is full of gold and precious stones. Give me the frog to swallow, and you take the gold and precious stones." The woman forthwith made for the frog, and began digging the hole with a stick. The young goldsmith was now quaking with fear, thinking his Rakshasi wife was about to kill him. She called out to him and said, "Husband, take up all this large quantity of gold and these precious stones." The goldsmith, not knowing what to make of it, timidly went to the place, and to his infinite surprise he saw gold and precious stones. They took up as much as they could. The husband asked his wife how she came to know of the existence of all these riches, and she said that she understood the language of animals, and that the snake coiled up hard, and had informed her of it. The goldsmith, on finding out what an accomplished wife he was blessed with, said to her, "My love, it is getting very late today. It would be impossible to reach your father's house before nightfall, and we may be devoured by wild beasts in the jungle. I propose, therefore, that we both return home." It took them a long time to reach home, for they were laden with large quantity of gold and precious stones. On coming near the house, the goldsmith said to his wife, "My dear, you go by the back door, while I go by the front door to see my father in his shop, and show him all this gold and precious stones." So she entered the house by the back door, and the moment she entered she was met by the old goldsmith, who had come that minute into the house for some purpose with a hammer in his hand. The old goldsmith, when he saw his Rakshasi daughter-in-law, concluded in his mind that she had killed and swallowed up his son. He therefore struck her on the head with a hammer, and she immediately died. That moment the son came into the house, but it was too late. Hence it is that I told your majesty that before you cut off a man's head, you really should inquire whether the man is really guilty." The king then called in his second son, and said to him, "If a man who I am entrusted with my honor and my life proves faithless, how should he be punished?" The second prince replied, "Doubtless such a man's head should be cut off, but before you kill, you should see whether the man is really faithless." "What do you mean?" inquired the king. "Let your majesty be pleased to listen," answered the prince, and he told this story. Once upon a time there reigned a king who was very fond of going out hunting. Once while he was out hunting, his horse took him to a dense forest far from his followers. He rode on, and did not see either villages nor towns. He became very thirsty, but he could see no pond, lake, or stream. At last he found something dripping from the top of the tree. Concluding it to be rainwater, which had rested in some cavity of the tree, he stood on horseback under the tree, and caught the dripping contents in a small cup. It was, however, no rainwater. A huge cobra, which was at the top of the tree, was dashing its fangs against the tree in a rage, and its poison was coming out and falling in drops. The king, however, thought it was rainwater, though his horse knew better. When the cup was nearly filled with the liquid snake poison, the king was about to drink it off. The horse, to save the life of his master, moved so that the cup fell from the king's hand and spilled all the liquid on the ground. The king became very angry with his horse, and with his sword gave a cut to the horse's neck, and the horse died immediately. Hence it is that I told your majesty that before you cut off a man's head, you should inquire whether the man is really guilty. The king then called to him his third and youngest son, and said, "If a man who I entrusted with my honor and my life proves faithless, how should he be punished?" The youngest prince replied, "Doubtless such a man's head should be cut off. But before you kill, you should see whether the man is really faithless." "What do you mean?" inquired the king. "Let your majesty be pleased to listen," answered the prince, and he told this story. Once upon a time there reigned a king who had in his palace a remarkable bird of the suka species. One day as the suka went out to the fields to fly around, he saw his dad and mom, who pressed him to come with them and spend some days in their nest in some far-off land. The suka answered that he would be very happy to come, but he could not go without the king's leave. He added that he would speak to the king on that very day, and would be ready to go the following morning if his dad and mom would come to that very spot. The suka spoke to the king, and the king gave leave with reluctance, as he was very fond of the bird. So the next morning the suka met his dad and his mom at the appointed place, and he went with them to his hometown nest, at the top of some high tree in the far-off land. The three birds lived together happily for a fortnight, at the end of which period the suka said to his mom and dad, "My beloved parents, the king has granted me leave for only a fortnight, and today the fortnight is over. Tomorrow I must start for the city of the king." His mom and dad readily agreed to the responsible proposal, and told him to take a present to the king. After laying their heads together for some time, they agreed that the present should be the fruit of the tree of immortality. So early the next morning the suka plucked a fruit off the tree of immortality, and carefully catching it in his beak, started on his aerial journey. As it was a heavy weight to carry, the suka was not able to reach the city of the king in that day, and he was benighted on the road. He took shelter in a tree, and was at a loss to know where to keep the fruit. If he kept it in his beak, it was sure, he thought, to fall out when he was asleep. Fortunately, he saw a hole in the trunk of the tree, in which he had taken shelter. Accordingly, he put the fruit in it. It so happened that in that hole there was a snake. In the course of the night, the snake darted its fangs on the fruit, and thus besmeared it with its poison. Early before the crow cawed, the suka, suspecting nothing, took up the fruit of immortality in its beak, and began its aerial voyage. The suka reached the palace, while the king was sitting with his ministers. The king was delighted to see his pet bird come again, and greatly admired the beautiful fruit which the suka had brought as a present. The fruit was very fair to look at. It was the loveliest fruit in all the earth, and as its name implies, it makes the eater immortal. The king was about to eat it, but his courtiers said that it was not advisable for the king to eat it, as it might be a poisonous fruit. He accordingly threw it to a crow, which perched on the wall. The crow ate part of it, but in a moment the crow fell down dead. The king, imagining that the Suka had intended to take away his life, took hold of the bird and killed it. The king ordered the stone of the deadly fruit, as it was thought to be planted in the garden outside the city. The stone, in course of time, became a large tree of bearing lovely fruit. The king ordered a fence to be put around the tree, and place a guard, lest people should eat the fruit and die. There lived in that city an old Brahmin and his wife, who used to live upon charity. The Brahmin one day, mourning his hard lot, and told his wife that instead of leading the wretched life of a beggar, he would eat the fruit of the poisonous tree in the king's garden, and thus end his days. So that very night he got up from his bed, and in order to get into the king's garden. His wife, suspecting her husband's intentions, followed him, and resolved to also eat the fruit and die with her husband. At that late hour of the night, the guard was asleep, and the old Brahmin plucked a fruit and ate it. The woman said to her husband, "If you die, what is the use of my life? I'll also eat and die." So saying, she plucked a fruit and ate it. Thinking that the poison would take some time to produce its due effect, they both went home and lay in bed, supposing that they would never again rise. To their infinite surprise, the next morning they found themselves not only young and alive, but vigorous. Their neighbors could scarcely recognize them. They had become so changed. The old Brahmin had become handsome and vigorous, with no gray hairs and no wrinkles on his cheeks. As for his wife, she had become as beautiful as any lady in the king's household. The king, hearing of this wonderful change, sent for the old Brahmin, who told him of all the circumstances. The king then greatly lamented the sad fate of his pet bird, and blamed himself for having killed it without fully inquiring into the case. "Hence it is," continued the youngest prince, "that I told your majesty that before you cut off the man's head, you should inquire whether the man is really guilty. I know your majesty thinks that last night I entered your chamber with wicked intent. Be pleased to hear me before you strike. Last night, as I was on my rounds, I saw a female figure coming out of the palace. On challenging her, she said that she was Rajlakshmi, the guardian deity of the palace, and that she was leaving the palace, as the king would be killed that night. I told her to come in, and that I would prevent the king from being killed. I went straight to your bedroom, and I saw a large cobra sitting round and round your golden bedstead. I killed the cobra, cut it up into 100 pieces, and put them in the pan dish. But while I was cutting up the snake, a drop of its blood fell on the breast of my mother. And then I thought that while I had saved my father, I had killed my mother. I wrapped a piece of cloth around my tongue 7 times and licked up the drop of blood. While I was licking up the blood, my mother opened her eyes and noticed me. This is what I have done. Now cut off my head if your majesty wishes it." The king, filled with joy and gratitude, embraced his son, and from that time loved him even more than he had before. Thus my story endeth. The Nadia thorn withereth, etc. The end. Wow, I really like the story within a story, in fact the 3 stories within the story, and it has echoes all the way back to the Dead Finger, all the way back in episode 60, and also the Armenian tale of Simon the Friend of the Snakes in episode 55. Wow, really reaching back. I need to re-record some of those. I've gotten better. I like how the sons preach patience, and I try and keep that same energy in my classroom. And the podcast shout-out is to Mamalyfe. That's Mamalyfe. Rose C., the Haitian mama, hosts a show with honest takes about raising boys and what it takes to be a man. She is very honest and real. And if you like her show as much as I do, go and give her a like, a rating, and a review. And the listener shout-out is to Ballarat, Australia. Traditional lands of the Wadawurrung people, Ballarat didn't have enough white folks come through until the 1830s. Then gold was found and there was a gold rush in the area. Then there were disputes about permits, and so there was a rebellion. In 1854, 22 gold miners were killed in the Eureka Uprising. The city changed from gold rush to industrial and continued to grow. The city name itself comes from two Wadawurrung words, Balla and Arat, meaning resting place or camping place. And I would love to rest there someday, and so to my listener in Ballarat, I say in Wadawurrung, Globata and Kungdaji. Take care, and goodbye.